I'm going to be short because Robert has a White House meeting he has to attend in 15 minutes. So I want to do two things. One, I want to thank you, Robert, for you and DHS team and the FBI and the others who quickly reacted to the Texas attack that we had and met with the Jewish community leaders. It was a great meeting, and we very much appreciate that. I want to thank you for joining the American Jewish Congress today and giving us a few minutes of your time to give us a little heads up as to what is government doing to prevent this ongoing and building domestic terrorism. Robert, by the way, is the Undersecretary of Strategy, Policy, and Plans, and he's responsible for driving policy and implementation of plans across all of DHS, which is the agency that we have to look to put some controls into what's going on in our country and around the world. So I'm going to be short and sweet and hand it over to you, and then we'll open it up for questions. Thank you very much, Robert.
Well, Jack, thank you so much. Thank you to you and to the American Jewish Congress for having me. When I came back into public service about 6 months ago to join the Biden administration, one of my very earliest and most significant priorities was what more can our federal government do to support the security of faith-based organizations in this country. I work at the Department of Homeland Security, and if our job is to do anything, it's to protect us here at home. And what is more of a home to communities across all faiths than their houses of worship, their religious schools and community centers? That is home. And so I just see it as at the very core of what our work is. And I can tell you it's a professional for me. It's also personal. I served until I was confirmed into federal service. I served on the board of directors of the Secure Communities Network, the Jewish Communities Security Organization. And so I know all too well the incredible challenges that the Jewish community has in ensuring that it can live its way of life and send its kids to religious schools and attend religious services at synagogues and shuls, and do all the other activities that build the fabric of a broader community. And it is nothing short of alarming. We've lived with anti-Semitism for a very long time in this country and this world, but the recent trends are certainly alarming, even in that historical context. That we have data from the FBI that of all the religious-based hate crimes and incidents reported, 50% of them were anti-Semitic in nature. This is a targeted community. And so collectively, we need targeted response and preparedness to get ready. And I want to talk to you about some of the resources that the Department of Homeland Security makes available, all the work we do to protect this community. And we do that against the backdrop of incidents at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, at the Chabad in Poway, California, most recently in Colleyville, Texas, and others as well. So this is not theoretical. This is action on the streets and with communities to protect. And so I want to talk to you about a few of the key efforts that we have going on here. First is money. We hear all the time from Jewish community groups that you need money for synagogues, religious schools, for security cameras, physical barriers, the kind of nuts and bolts security blocking and tackling that is needed to secure sites. We have a program that we administer called the Nonprofit Security Grants Program. We gave out $180 million last year to nonprofit institutions, the vast majority of which are to faith-based organizations to harden up their security. So we are putting funding behind our concern, which I think is always an important thing to do. And we've been clear we've said our Secretary Mayorkas, who's also deeply dedicated to this cause, has said that we need to dramatically increase the funding available under the Nonprofit Security Grant Program. We're going to be working with Congress, which sets the funding levels, to make sure that happens. That is a very high priority for the Biden administration to get that done, and you can be assured we're on it. Another line of effort is intelligence and information sharing. You need to know, the community needs to know what the threats are and what it needs to be vigilant towards. We regularly share intelligence products with Jewish community organizations to advise them of the threat streams. We share unclassified products. We convene regular threat briefing calls with our intelligence unit here at the Department of Homeland Security, so that you and your members can be aware of and vigilant to the threats that are out there. We also are very focused here at the department on prevention, just preventing people from radicalizing to the point where they get violent. And we all see the turn to radicalization that comes from to violence that comes from online platforms, extremist content that drives people to violence, often based on anti-Semitic or other racist motivations. And we are working with communities across this country to equip them to identify the objective behavioral signs that someone might be radicalizing to violence, because there are those objective red flag indicators, and it's often not the federal government or even a local police department that's in a position to see them. It's a pastor or a rabbi, it's a teacher, it's a coach, it's a parent that needs to be on the lookout for signs that someone is heading in this very worrying direction. And we are educating communities and funding communities to increase awareness in that respect, with the objective of preventing violence before it even gets to that tragic point. Obviously, sometimes things do get to a certain point. We saw that recently in Colleyville, and I was just incredibly honored to be a part of the response, together with my colleagues from the FBI, that led a very hard day to a good ending. And so we operate on that level as well. And then I'll just finally say, from a resources perspective, we make available self-assessment toolkits on our website for free that you can use to do self-security assessments to ensure you're following security best practices. I think I'll just say, in conclusion, that a week after Colleyville, I was at a Shabbat service with my son. And I have to be honest that Colleyville was on my mind, and I was looking around with a little bit of anxiety. And I actually realized in that moment what our mission is here. It's to address that feeling. It's to make people feel secure and that they can worship in peace and live their lives in peace. And always be vigilant, but not scared. And that's my mission as I approach the work here, doing it together with partners in the Jewish community and the faith-based community more broadly. So Jack and the American Jewish Congress team, I'm really appreciative for the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. So let me ask the first question, and then we'll let you go. If you have an answer for my question. So, you've touched on the tools that you've made available, others in government over the years have made available to try and prevent, the growing anti-Semitism and domestic violence in America. They include money and prevention and other tools. We at the American Jewish Congress, with the help of Max Rose, by the way, I don't know if you've met Max or not. He's running for Congress again. Great guy. He's on our advisory board. But we're pressing Congress to pass the domestic terrorism bill, which will include the ability to name some of the domestic terrorist organizations as foreign terrorist organizations, which will allow more tools for law enforcement. And I guess my question for you is, do you think that the continuation of trying to use what are our traditional tools can somehow alter the course of this growing violence we see, hatred, anti-Semitism, or do you think that we would do a much better job if we had more aggressive tools, such as naming these organizations that have some linkage to foreign terrorist organizations as foreign terrorist organizations? Because that's what we're pushing for. We think that we need to change direction to some extent here, because these tools haven't been working.
Thanks very much, Jack. Listen, this is an evolving threat, so we have to have evolving tools and capabilities and strategies. I mean, if we stay static here, that clearly isn't going to be the right approach, especially you see what's happening in the online ecosystem, the way people are radicalizing to violence based on different ideologies and motivations. So we actually are, since this administration came in, we have pivoted and enhanced our abilities in a number of respects. We actually stood up a domestic terrorism branch here in our intelligence unit at the Department of Homeland Security to focus on this very unique threat stream, because it is different than foreign directed terrorism. It's a different phenomenon, quite a lethal phenomenon. And we also are increasing funding. We're developing unbelievable, unprecedented amounts of direct information sharing to the private sector so that they can protect themselves. And we should look to other solutions too, that we can do as an administration or that we can work with Congress to implement. I have to run. I have to go join a call with the White House, and I apologize for that. But I wish you the best of success with the rest of the event, which is a really important one. And I look forward to being in touch.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. So let me turn this over to Jerome Hauer, who's a member of our advisory board, and he'll run the rest of this meeting over here. So Jerome is a former commissioner of New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, quite active in law enforcement and counterterrorism issues and other matters. Jerome, I'm going to turn this over to you. You can introduce Max and continue the questioning.
Great, thanks, Jack. Well, we've got about 40 minutes to focus on some really key issues. Let me introduce Max, because Max will be one of our panelists here. It's really an honor to introduce him. Max is a military officer and is currently running for Congress. And we wish him the best in doing that. We need people like Max in Congress. It's important to have his background, his knowledge sitting there in Congress. Max was a senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense for COVID until July of 2021. He chaired the Homeland Security Subcommittee on Intelligence and Counterterrorism. He has been very involved in this issue. He was a U.S. Army platoon leader in combat in the war in Afghanistan. He was wounded while on duty. He was awarded a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart. He continues as a captain in the National Guard. You and I have that in common, although I was a captain as a reservist, but that was 30 years ago. It's a great honor to have you with us, Max. We've got a lot to discuss today. And what I'd like to do is frame this, and I'll turn it over to Max and Jack. What we want to try and do is understand this threat of domestic white supremacist terrorism. What we want to understand is why it's so difficult for the government to label these groups as foreign terrorist organizations. And I guess, Max, let me start with you and ask the first question. Would you give us a sense as to what the global outlook on these groups and their connectivity? Because I think most Americans, most people here in the US don't understand that there's a connectivity between the groups here in the US, the white supremacists and the terrorist groups overseas. So if you could give us an understanding of that.
Jerome, first of all, thank you for your really kind words and your incredible service, which has kept us all safe for so many years. And of course, Jack, thank you for your friendship and everything that you have done remarkably in support of Jewish communities, not just across America, but across the globe. The biggest misnomer right now about domestic terrorism in the United States of America as it pertains to white supremacist terrorism is that it is domestic at all. And for some reason, and I suspect that it has to do with racial biases, we have been unable over the course of the last 5 years to get over this mental hurdle that we should not be using the same tools that we have used successfully for the last 20 years to fight jihadist terrorism against this new strain of global white supremacist terrorism. And the facts couldn't be clearer. Just look at the Proud Boys, for instance. The Proud Boys have chapters in 40 different nations. Nations such as Canada have already labeled the Proud Boys as a terrorist organization. The Proud Boys, yes, originated in the United States of America, but that does not change the fact that they are now global. Look at Combat 18 in Canada. Look at Sonnenkrieg, which is in the UK, which is an offshoot of Atomwaffen, yes, a domestic American group. Look at the fact that Americans have gone to train with Azov, the Russian imperial movement in Russia, which is a specially designated terrorist group by the United States. And then of course, look at the ideological connections, not just, may I add, to white supremacist terrorism, but to jihadist terrorism as well. Why else would one of the leading terrorist organizations in the United States of America call itself the Base, which is the literal translation of Al-Qaeda? Why else would several members of the Base be arrested for providing material support to Hamas, a foreign terrorist organization? Now, when you think about what is the significance of the foreign terrorist organization list, it is that it enables the Justice Department to and our law enforcement agencies to have enhanced surveillance capabilities, but it also enables them to charge those who are affiliated with these groups and supporting them with the charge of providing material support to a foreign terrorist organization. That is what we have done in the face of the threat from Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and so many other groups the last 20 years. And our failure to do so in the run-up to 9/11 is one of the reasons why 9/11 occurred in the first place. Now, what is interesting about the behind closed doors response from this administration and those that have preceded it when it comes to expanding the foreign terrorist organization list, well, they'll say, ironically, well, there are too many members of these organizations in the United States of America. We understand that the Proud Boys get labeled as terrorists in other countries, but there's too many Proud Boys in America, so it's not going to work. Well, maybe we should send a message to Al-Qaeda and ISIS that if they just increase their domestic membership rolls, they'll get taken off the foreign terrorist organization list too. It's patently absurd. The only reason why they're not doing this is because they're afraid. And just to close out here, it is, I think, totally wrong that while the Democratic Party has said about the Trump administration that they are sympathizers to white supremacists, that it was the Trump administration that put the Russian imperial movement, a white supremacist global organization, on the list of specially designated terrorist groups. Now, they should have put plenty of organizations on the foreign terrorist organization list. They did not. But that is more than what the Biden administration has done. I think that this administration needs to do more in this space. Our safety, the safety of Jewish communities, relies on it, and we do not want to act after a horrific incident. We want to act before it.
Well, Max, why doesn't this information get out? I follow these groups. I follow these issues very closely, but you don't see much in the media about the connection between the domestic and the foreign groups. What is the issue that is preventing the media from getting this information out?
Well, I think if we traveled back to 1993 and 1994, previous to the, in 95 too, previous to the bombings of embassies by Al-Qaeda in Africa, US embassies, previous to the 01 USS Cole bombing, we would have been shocked at the absence of coverage of Al-Qaeda. We would have been shocked at the absence of coverage of the overall jihadist terrorism threat. But of course, the only reason why we would be shocked is because so many of us lived through 9/11, as well as the attempted attacks thereafter. So what we are trying to do right now is the hardest thing to do in government. It's the hardest thing to do in public life, which is to instill a sense of urgency around action before a crisis and not after. Now, the second reason why, though, I think that there's a failure here to do this is because we have put ourselves into an ideological and intellectual trap unnecessarily, an unnecessarily intellectual silo, whereby when it comes to the threat of jihadist terrorism, we have a very significant global purview, but somehow when it comes to the threat of white supremacist terrorism, we have to look at it domestically. And I must say that I think the only reason, or one of the principal reasons why that is because of unspoken inherent racial biases. And that is something that we have to push to get over, because genuinely what we are seeing with these global white supremacist movements, many of which the leading domestic organizations have strong connections to, is that they have anti-Semitism built into their DNA. And that is one of the reasons why they have such a strong linkage, ideologically speaking, or at least a strong affinity for jihadist terrorist groups. You know, when it comes to a lot of these folks, they're sampling from the extremist buffet, and anti-Semitism is a leading platter there. And we have to stand up and do something. The State Department changing their foreign terrorist organization list does not require the action of Congress. Let me repeat that. It could involve the action of Congress. It does not require it. All this requires is the will of this administration.
You know, when I think about what the media does and what movies do about overseas terrorism, everything is painted as Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Hamas, Hezbollah, and you think about the fighters like that. You don't see these white supremacists connected to these groups. There's almost a cognitive dissonance when you think about that kind of connection. And we've got to get the public thinking about the fact that there is a connection, there is a feed from these groups. And I think that's a real challenge because of the way they're reported and viewed.
Yeah, absolutely. And just think about what we're doing in the absence of this. And I think if we take a step back, we can really reveal the sheer ridiculousness of it all. America does not have a domestic terrorism charge. Let me repeat that again. America does not have a federal domestic terrorism charge, and there is not the political will to do so in Congress. I think that's an unfortunate truth. But in the absence of that, I don't care how much funding or how many congressional resolutions you pass in regards to enforcing or protecting us against domestic terrorism. What you're ultimately doing is protect, and this is a valiant cause, you're protecting us against domestic violence. But what we are concerned about right now is terrorism. And that is totally different because the goals of terrorism are completely different. It's not just about inflicting violence, it's about instilling fear and causing massive societal disruption. But what our opening here is the fact that the principal threat we face from local terrorism today has significant global purviews. The overall categorization of domestic terrorism is that it originates from someone who is residing domestically. That they can be here on an undocumented basis, they can be here on a temporary basis, they can be here on a permanent basis. Under that definition, which I think is correct, 9/11 was an act of domestic terrorism as well, because they were all living here or residing here. But we don't think about it that way. And it's time that I think we should.
That's a very important point. Thanks, Matt. Jack, let me turn to you. You feel very strongly about the connection between these domestic terrorist groups and the shadow of Nazi Germany and what went on. It'd be interesting to hear you elaborate on that, because it's a really important point.
So, we're all astonished now, 75 years later, we find with such ease that anti-Semites can evoke Nazi symbolism, the most horrific period in, human history, crimes against humanity. And yet here we are as Americans seeing too many individuals, some political leaders, use Nazi symbolism as a way of spewing their hatred and their growing anti-Semitism. And you have to ask yourself why. But maybe more importantly, we have to ask ourselves, if we see America changing, how rapidly we can all be surprised at the differences within our society, the amount of hatred within our society. We have to ask ourselves whether we can find ourselves once again in a situation that created Nazi Germany. And, when you see politicians, basically selling their platforms, raising money around using Nazi symbolism, you wonder, how far does this go? This is how, Nazi Germany started, the reaction and the plan to wipe out Jewry through the use of Nazi symbols and Nazi hate speech, identification of Jews as the enemy. We see that slow creep in America. And maybe we all better wake up here and say, we don't know any longer how far this can go. I just heard, and I should acknowledge Joel Rubin is on the panel, on the call today. Joel, thank you. And to Susan Ockery, thank you both for supporting us here today. But, we should understand that maybe we're at a time in America where we can again see, the creep of such animosity, such hatred, such indecent human behavior come into our society. And that is a danger for us Jews, certainly, but it's a danger for all minorities in America. And we don't hear anybody standing up against it. You've got Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Republican politician. Not one Republican stands up to her. We've had a few anti-Semites in the Democratic Party, and we've spent too much time defending them and excusing them. And I think one of the things the Jewish community's got to do is stand up and speak out against this and demand that their political leaders and their influencers in this country speak up against this use of Nazi symbolism. It just represents something that scares the hell out of me. It should scare all of us in the community.
Yeah, you know something, Jack, I guess the question is, if we do start to see more and more members of Congress or leaders in state and local government take office with these kinds of backgrounds, what are we going to do to try and stem the hatred? Because, you know, I lived in Indiana for 7 years, and I knew the areas that were problematic, where anti-Semitism was quite significant, not widespread, but we knew there were areas where the KKK was very prominent. What do we do about this? What do we do to prevent these people from getting elected?
Well, first, we've got to wake up and understand that there's a danger. I don't know that our community is there yet. And as Max pointed out, you don't wait till after an event. You have to prepare for these events. We're not there yet. We still believe in America. In America, we've known for, you know, whatever number of years we've been living here in this country, and it's changing rapidly overnight. So we have to, you know, we've got to get the American community as a whole, but certainly the Jewish community to you know, be cognizant of what's going on over here. We have to use our voices and our influence to speak up, not to let political leaders get away with it. Okay, they need to speak up against these anti-Semites. They need to speak up against these people who spew this hatred and use the, you know, these symbolisms in such a loose manner. And then we got to get up and vote and support candidates. You know, that's how America works. That's, you know, for many years, we were, you know, we still continue to be active in political circles, but we support candidates. We're active. We're outspoken, and we need to get the community to you know, to get more engaged in doing that. I think we've gotten comfortable in America.
Well,
and
you
we're
know,
not prepared.
that's a very important point. You know, I've been in this business a long time, both as Commissioner of Homeland Security, Assistant Secretary at HHS, and the first director of the Office of Emergency Management in New York City. So I've worked it, and I've worked with the Jewish community very closely, particularly in Brooklyn because of the issues. And when I was commissioner for the state, the Jewish community upstate. And one of the things that I see is complacency. And that complacency doesn't change until something happens. And it's one of the most frustrating things that we can deal with is trying to get these people motivated. Now, the complacency occurs at two levels. There's the grassroots complacency, and there's the complacency in the organizations. Malcolm Homeland is a very good friend of mine and represents all the presidents of Jewish organizations. Getting them engaged was very important. But when you start to trickle down, how do you get the grassroots basically off their butts to do something?
Look, it's hard. We at the American Jewish Congress are working, you know, to expose this. We issue statements every time they're you know, we find these anti-Semitic remarks or these, you know, Nazi symbolisms. We've been exposing them for the last year. And we're trying to get more and more, you know, members of the community to participate with us and speak out against it. But there is a complacency, and we have to keep working at it. I don't know that there's a magic formula, Jerry. we see more acts of violence. I think the community is beginning to wake up to that, whether it's, Pittsburgh or it's Texas or it's California. Suddenly, when you look at the statistics and the polling numbers, there are more Jews that are fearful of anti-Semitic violent attacks against them. We see it growing in some parts of New York City, for example. So I think we're beginning to wake up to it. And organizations like the American Jewish Congress, I think, have to carry that message and have an impact. And, for those of you who are joining us today, that's one of the reasons that we have a panel discussion like this and invite you is to expose you to this and to get your ideas as to how we might become more effective in telling this story and getting people engaged.
One of the biggest challenges, Jack, is translating that fear into action. And that was one of my biggest frustrations.
Yeah. Well, none of us in America today walk down the street thinking that someone will attack us because we look Jewish or they see us walking out of a synagogue. But I think we're becoming more cognizant of it. And I hope it goes away because the attacks stop. I'm afraid it won't go away and the attacks will increase. Joel this morning said that apparently this trucker strike in Canada is getting some truckers to also make anti-Semitic comments. Somehow Jews and anti-Semitism become part of this trucker strike in Canada. And that, if that moves down to America, we may see some more of that here as well. It's troubling, it's crushing. This is our country. This is where our children are growing up. And we see, the norms are just eroding. And we got to fight every day hard to make sure that we're all engaged in stopping it.
Thanks, Jack. Max, let me get back to you. The Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act and the alert system they put together, could you give us a sense as to what that is and whether or not it means anything?
Yeah, I think that whenever it comes to any of this, we have to be able to separate what we're doing against violent crime and what we're doing against terrorism. Whenever we're thinking about terrorism, it's important that we remember that these are organized groups with centered ideology that are engaging in sophisticated attacks that often involve long-term planning and some type of visceral motivation. That is not to be confused with militia movements that are emerging in the United States of America. That's not to be confused with spontaneous political violence. And what we saw, an instance on January 6th, was actually an amalgamation of all the three, right? We had the Oath Keepers, we had Proud Boys, we had angry Trump supporters that suddenly became violent. And we had people that got caught up in it for whatever reason that ultimately engaged in insurrectionist-like behavior. And the second that we put all of this into one bucket, because they're all white, we actually don't do the issue justice, nor do we keep Jewish communities safe. So what is good about what we are doing with this recent movement in domestic terrorism is we're making a real effort to look at these domestic groups as sophisticated organizations who are also engaging in criminal activity. The unfortunate thing, though, here is that we still only retain prosecutorial authorities as well as general law enforcement surveillance authorities as it relates to their criminal activity, not as it relates to their terrorist activity, for two very simple reasons. One, no domestic terrorism charge in the United States of America. Two, not one white supremacist organization on the foreign terrorist organization list, and only one on the specially designated terrorist group list. All of which, may I add, is completely within our ability to change. Now, this is the number one threat against Jewish communities right now. It's one reason why when I was in Congress, we were able to achieve bipartisan support behind this effort. I co-sponsored a resolution along with Republican Tom Reed. This is merely a source of an absence of will. At this point, the United States of America is the Saudi Arabia of white supremacist ideology. Just as Saudi Arabia exports Wahhabism and other dangerous strains of jihadist terrorist ideology, as well as organizational funding, the United States of America right now is exporting anti-Semitic white supremacist ideologies that are being taken up by organizations throughout the world, many of which have already been labeled terrorist organizations by entities such like New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the United Kingdom, Central European nations, and so on and so forth, and many more to come. Just because we want to be asleep at the wheel does not mean that this threat will follow in the same manner.
Are these overseas organizations funding our domestic terrorists?
No, it's not that simple. It's not that simple, and it's not a direct passageway in that manner. There is incredible cross-collaboration, incredible cross-communication. We're seeing the movement of individuals. The Sufan group, for instance, has put out some incredible reports that have shown that, for instance, if you look at the Azov battalion in Ukraine, as well as the Russian imperial movement in Russia, and two sides of the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, we've seen more foreign fighters go to that conflict than we saw travel to support the Mujahideen during the entirety of the Soviet Union's conflict with them in Afghanistan. So we are genuinely living, as it pertains to the white supremacist threat and all of its anti-Semitic virulence, we are living in 1993 right now. And it is up to us whether we want to act before something happens or after.
The DHS National Terrorism Advisory System that was just issued, does that have any teeth behind it?
It doesn't have teeth, but it is of value because it's a method of communicating intelligence down to local law enforcement units and agencies. We cannot do anything about America's federalized law enforcement structure. Yeah, as you know much better than I do, law enforcement in the United States is local. And much of what the DHS does is make sure that what the federal government knows, local law enforcement knows. And then we see fusion centers that arrive out of that. I do think that we need a fusion center, a DHS fusion center centered around domestic terrorism, or centered around, better yet, white supremacist terrorism. And on top of that, though, I would say that we need more organizations like what the partnership between the NYPD and the FBI. But if you went to speak to the NYPD about this and their joint partnership with the FBI, an organization that I know you've worked hand in hand with, they'll say that over 50% of their focus when it comes to counterterrorism is coming out of the white supremacist threat, but they don't have the same tools. Isn't it crazy today? Let's just put it as simply as possible. If someone prays to Allah and is a terrorist, they are treated one way in the United States of America. If someone has white skin and they pray to another God or to no one at all, they are treated in a different manner, despite the fact that both have terrorist ambitions. That
very important point
is wrong. And when you talk about how do we build a coalition around this, this is not just something that Jewish groups across the country need to stand up and say we must do something about. But may I add, progressive groups, as well as other organizations, have really significant interest in making sure that the basic framework of our counterterrorism philosophy and policy is not inherently discriminatory.
That last point of yours, right on the numbers. If you're white, you're treated differently than if you're praying to Allah. And that's a big issue. And we haven't been able to crack it. At this point in time, Jack, I think we're ready to take questions. Max, can't thank you enough. We've got about 15 minutes or 12 minutes to take questions. Akri, would you shoot the questions to me? Okay, we've got Dr. Kazmir is going to be asking the first question. Go ahead, Dr. Kazmir.
Just 1 second, I'm sorry. In what area could Congress move forward in the fight against domestic terrorism in bipartisan way, and how we can help in that regard?
Well, look, what I'll say to that is I think that Congress needs to pass a resolution calling on the State Department to label the leading global white supremacist organizations as foreign terrorist organizations. To put it in less subtle terms, the Democratic Party needs to unite around calling on the Biden administration to do more in the fight against global white supremacist terrorism than the Trump administration was willing to do. And right now they haven't.
Thank you, Congressman.
Okay, Ben Shuaki will be next. If you could put him on the screen, Akri.
We lose Akri? Susan, are you there?
Here he comes. Ben, would you, do you hear us?
Yeah, I unmuted, and I'll put my video on. Thank you. So, you know, you're addressing appropriately the danger of anti-Semitism within our domestic area, and my sense is that you're concentrating largely on the right as a group that we've neglected to address with anti-Semitism. I think it's worth noting that the movement of anti-Semitism in terms of a vision and in terms of pushing it in general areas, whether it's on college campuses or even in public policy, has been, at least from what I've seen, largely a problem of the far left wing, the socialist Democrats. So my question is, from your point of view, what do we do about this as well? What do we do about the anti-Semitic movements within the campuses, the intolerance, the harassment of Jewish students, and the the difficulty in this matter from those quarters as well? You know, where people are literally disenrolling from schools, can't participate. Schools are pushing BDS. They're overtly hostile to both Jewish groups, not only to Israel, but to Jewish groups as well.
So Ben, let me see if I can sort of answer you in a way that may disappoint some Americans. I think that we need to get government more active. Government's reticence is, you know, the question of the First Amendment, and there are no rights to hate speech. But when it comes to issues like BDS on campus, there's a reticence on the part of government to take action. And just like Max is urging us to make sure Congress takes action on domestic terrorists, I think we got to urge Congress and urge the administration to take much stronger measures against hate speech, especially on campus and in BDS movements. Barring that, it's the same problem that we always suffer with anti-Semitism. There are those that hate, and we can't convince them not to hate us. And it's going to take government. And, I believe in the First Amendment, but I think there needs to be limits to this. Government has got to have the tools.
How do we reinforce the Title IX enforcement on these campuses that permit hostile environments and perpetuate anti-Semitism within these campuses? How do we beef it up? Because it's there, but the enforcement is lax.
If you hold back funding, if you enforce actions, there are actions that are enforceable that the education department hasn't taken yet. They've gone real slow, including the Biden administrations. But there are actions they could take, and funding is the best tool, we have always to get people to change behavior.
Well, with the laws in place, if a college or an institution is found in violation, they could lose their ability to get student loans. That gets their attention very quickly because that shuts down the college.
Yeah, so
places like Harvard or Yale that have endowments and billions of dollars and don't care.
You're the biggest pack in a Jewish pack in America, and the question is, you've got to convince every one of those candidates that comes to you to enforce the laws on the books and take action and hold back funding.
Yeah.
Maybe we should put it as part of our agenda. Max, what do you think?
Yeah, so at the root of this is, what is your definition of anti-Semitism? Because right now, if you look at Title IX, as well as generally, as Jack said, there's no right to, just as there's no right to yell fire in a crowded movie theater, people don't have a right to receive public funds and engage in explicit hate speech. And I think it is our collective responsibility to normalize the following, which is, enshrined in the International Holocaust Remembrance definition of anti-Semitism. That, first of all, and I've sworn an oath to protect and defend the Constitution multiple times. I've shed blood in defense of this country and the Constitution. People have a right, based off the First Amendment, to say things that I find deeply offensive. They have a right to say things that I disagree with. But they do not have a right to cross that line. And I believe that that line is exemplified by whether or not you are subjecting Israel to a standard that you would not subject any other nation to. And that is exemplified certainly in much of what the BDS movement is calling for. So this is sensitive stuff, this is difficult stuff, but there is a pathway for us to ensure that we are doing two things. One, we're ensuring that Jewish students across the country and Jewish communities feel safe to express their religious beliefs, safe to wear a kippah, safe to congregate, safe to be their true selves. And at the same time, that people feel that their First Amendment rights are naturally protected under the auspices of how we protect First Amendment rights here. And the avenue is that the pathway for us to achieve this is very much there. It just takes courage, and it takes willing to stand up and say that we have to do what we think is right.
Right, thank you. I mean, I think that they're going to have to step it up because this perpetuation of harassment of students and groups based on Jewish faith has reached intolerable levels, and you let it go there, it just moves forward to other avenues. One feeds the other.
All right, let me get to our final question. Akri, Ben, thank you very much for those questions. Very, very important issues. The final question is from Michael Melnick, my better looking brother. Michael, are you on?
I think we might have lost him.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there he is.
Yeah, we can hear you. Mayor, how are you?
Fine, thank you, Commissioner. Congressman Jack, my good friend. I heard from the beginning to the end, and all touched different points. The question arises, we take action, I think the Congressman alluded to that. After the action has been taken, either a synagogue or a big event, but I like to focus on the individual. They're walking down where I live right now, either in Los Angeles, where my father's house is a block away, or in New Borough Park where we live, when individuals with cars run by and using derogatory names of Jews, kill the Jews, Hitler should have killed you all. Where does it stem from? It stems from my opinion that the education, forget about the politician, there would also, people listen to politics, the way they talk, the way they speak, it resonates in those individuals who listen to them. But education, where if we, the United States, can hack computers, can hack other countries, or they hack us, we can put people to the moon or to Mars. There's gotta be that when it comes to anti-Semitism, and I don't want to hear the amendment right of speech and to say whatever you want. No one can say a fire in the middle of a theater. When you have these hackers or these programs on computers teaching anti-Semitism, and this is what the young kids go and listen to, it resonates into their brain again and again. I'm going to go back to the famous story of Rabbi Akiva, one of the greatest leaders during the Second Temple, the end of the Second Temple. He started to learn the ABC at the age of 40 years old. He was a shepherd, and he saw water coming out of a stream, at the bottom of the stream of a boulder, and said, how does the boulder have water? He finally looked that sitting on top of the mountain, water was dripping on top of the boulder. It just dripped and dripped until it made a hole into the boulder and became a stream. If we don't continue educating, telling him and stopping, sitting by a panel is very good to educate us, but we got to get to the core of it. You got to take out the cancer from within, is by teaching and stopping these radicals, people going on internets and teaching hatred. If you don't have that, it's going to be very difficult for us to walk down the street and people not hitting us or hurting us or cursing us.
Absolutely.
Jack or Max, we've got a minute or so. Who wants to take that? Max, go ahead.
Yeah, look, let me just say, Michael, it's great to see you. Anti-Semitism is the oldest and most virulent, disgusting form of hatred in our world today. And it arises in many different forms, some new, some very old. And we can never allow for us to be satisfied with a society in which what you just explained is occurring. And I know it's occurring because I've seen my former constituents and people I dearly love, to include your family, experience it. What this will require to counter this is a whole of government approach, to include actions by law enforcement, to include strength from local law enforcement, to include updating our laws, to include enforcing our federal laws, to include, when necessary, taking a strong global approach. And lastly, to never get comfortable. What I found, I grew up in a world where there was this pervasive sense that we were past anti-Semitism. Particularly in some more liberal communities, there was a sense that this was now something of the past. We cannot lose from our public leaders a sense of proactiveness and a fierce sense of urgency around this issue. That's how I intend on living my life. I know this may be the only moment where I would ever speak for Jack, but I know that that's where Jack is as well on this issue. And I think it would be fitting to give Jack the opportunity to close us out here.
Jack, go ahead.
I want to ask you one question. Why can no one speaks about the Omar and all the Congress people when they talk anti-Semitic? Why does everybody stand up and shut them down? What are they afraid of?
They're afraid of the social
what?
media platforms and the number of people they reach and the number of potential voters and contributors they get on social media.
So it means to say, let them grow and you destroy ourselves. That's what it means.
Michael, I think that, and look, I've criticized multiple members of my own party multiple times, to include the individuals that you're referencing. I think that we have got to make sure that we are not also letting the Republican Party off the hook when it comes to their deep-seated anti-Semitism as well. Whether that's commercials of George Soros or so many other instances. But you are 100% right. When it comes to protecting communities from anti-Semitism, blind party allegiance has no place. It has no place. And I fully support your efforts to hold elected officials accountable on both sides of the aisle who exercise that blind party allegiance.
All right, well, listen, we are a little over on time. Michael, thank you for that question. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Every time I listen to Max and Jack, I learn something. Always a pleasure to listen to their thoughts on what's going on in this country and the connection worldwide. I want to thank everyone for being on the webinar today. I want to thank you for your questions. With that, I want to end this by just saying be safe, have a good Sabbath, and we'll hopefully talk with you again soon.
Gary, thank you. Thank you all for joining us, and come join the fight.
Absolutely. Thank you again.
Thank you.